I thought that we would mention, again, there was this assassination attempt. Fortunately, it failed. The General Alexeyev is recovering, is conscious. I guess is now in stable condition. Apparently, he actually struggled with the assassin, with the would-be assassin, and that saved his life. And his wife was there too, and immediately applied a tourniquet, and that may have saved his life. So, two very brave and quick-thinking individuals there. Now, I thought it would be, it's interesting to point out, recently I've talked about the Strangler, is Pokhla, the new deputy head of the SBU. And many people say that he's the real head of it. It's often a custom. It was a custom during the Soviet Union, and it extended to some pre-Soviet states. So the number two man is the real head, the guy who's really, he's the guy in charge of operations. And he used to be the head of the Assassination division. And again, he used to be a hitman for organized crime. That's what is widely believed and been reported in Ukraine. So it is all the would-be assassin was captured. He got on a plane that flew to Dubai, but the Russians figured it out and notified the UAE. And the UAE authorities arrested him, upon his arrival there and sent him back to Russia. So they have him, and he's confessed that it was the SBU. He was born in Western Ukraine, during the Soviet years. Became a Russian citizen, but obviously maintained this identity. And it was while he was back visiting in Western Ukraine that he was approached by the SBU, apparently with the help of Polish intelligence, which is rather alarming. But that's what is reported. That was reported in Russian media just today, because this man's son, what is his name? Kupra, I think it is. But his son is actually a Polish citizen, and so they reached him through his son, and then he agreed to become an asset. And eventually, he received, according to him, the orders to assassinate Alexeyev back in December. Now, Alexeyev, we know, is the senior, the number two man to the head of the negotiation team that has been conducting the recent negotiations in Abu Dhabi in the UAE. And he may have been, there are reports in the Russian media that he was actually part of the negotiating team. In any case, he has been involved in many negotiations in the past. Like, he's apparently negotiated a lot of prisoner exchanges. He was involved deeply in the negotiations at the Azov steel plant. If you remember that early in the war, there was a number of it was the Azov battalion back then at the steel plant, and he helped negotiate their surrender. So he has been involved in negotiations, and very possibly he was directly involved in the negotiations in Abu Dhabi. In any case, he's the number two man of the chief negotiator. So this seems like a direct strike on these negotiations, and again, it's almost certainly was carried out under the auspices of the Strangler, Pokhla. And you look at that, there's another link with negotiations there. Back at the very beginning, very soon after the start of the SMO, when the negotiations that led to the Istanbul agreement had begun, they actually started in Minsk, in Belarus, and then moved to Istanbul. But the chief negotiator on the Ukrainian side was assassinated. And it turned out by the SBU. This was in the end acknowledged within Ukraine. And who was involved in that? It was the Strangler. So we have this connection again and again. And in a way, it's really remarkable. It seems to me amazing that the Ukrainians would do this. Because I think also Zelensky must have known about it. Zelensky appointed this guy, the Strangler, to be the number two man recently. So he knows what's going on. I don't think that they could have done it without his approval. But that he would do that and think that he could get away with it is amazing. Now, there's a lot of anger in Russia about this. I guess Alexeyev was a well-known figure and highly regarded in Russia, especially in nationalist circles. Apparently he had some sort of association with Prigozhin that got him into trouble, when Prigozhin launched his mutiny. But he was brought back in from the cold afterwards. He kind of spent some time in the proverbial doghouse, but then he was brought back in. And he's, in general, a highly regarded general, very, very highly regarded and very well known. So there's a great deal of anger about this assassination attempt in Russia. And it just remains to be seen what the Russians will do. Now, I guess on one thing you can think, well, the point of this was to stop the negotiations. So if we do stop the negotiations, then we're letting them win. You could make that argument. But on the other hand, it's just like, I think that they should. I mean, that this is just so outrageous that you can't have, one side actually assassinating the negotiators on the other side and then continue. Like you say that this has to end. Like at the very least, you have to demonstrate that your good faith by handing over. There's one woman that was involved in this, apparently rented an apartment within the apartment building where the assassination attempt was carried out. And she fled to Ukraine and is apparently now in Ukraine. You say you got to hand her over, for example. And if you don't, then we know that, we know where you stand on this and we can't negotiate with you. And I don't see how the Americans could protest. And the Americans themselves should be furious if they're actually interested in negotiations, but we're not hearing anything. Now, of course, the Ukrainians have done similar things in the past, but this is particularly outrageous. And I think I would be, Putin is so rational, to a point sometimes where it just really seems cold-blooded. I in this case, I just feel like, usually I defend Putin. I think that we're very lucky he has such a rational, he's such a rational being. But if he doesn't actually respond firmly to this, I would be disappointed. It just seems like it would be a mistake.
So right now there hasn't been any formal response. They're kind of mulling it over. I mean, just a general condemnation. I mean,
yeah. Well, they have, yeah. First of all, they had to find out who did it, but now they've found out the guy has confessed, and on tape he wasn't beaten up. At least he didn't show any signs of injury. I saw the video. So I don't know. I'm sure the Russians are talking to the Americans, but who knows? Like we had this. They have already accused Polish intelligence of being involved in this, and we know that the SBU has actually very extensive ties with MI6. Who knows what?
Yeah,
what's going on behind the scenes?
This whole assassinating, decapitating, leadership, going after negotiators, and killing journalists, massacring civilians. I mean, it all feels very IDF-y. It does feel like that's just kind of what we've seen Israel do. Do you think that's one of the reasons that we're seeing this type of behavior, this type of actions that the U.S. is doing, kidnapping presidents, these types of just dropping a bomb on a Houthi tribal gathering, for example, and wiping them out? These type of actions, I just felt like the U.S. didn't engage in these, at least not so openly, blowing up these speedboats or off of Venezuela, or fishing boats. And is it because that Israel's been doing this for so long that we've just kind of this is becoming more and more acceptable? I
think there's quite a bit of truth to that. And again, I think, as I pointed out before, if you go back to the founding of the neoconservative movement, they were always, Zionism was always a big part of what they were about. That's not all of it. Not by any means, but that was part of it. And there was both a desire to make America strong, militarily strong and aggressive, on behalf of Israel. But there was also this admiration for Israel and say that we can learn from them. That was, again, they're the ones to take the gloves off. They're the ones that are not afraid to use military force, to impose their will. And look, clearly, the U.S. has done that, but there was a reluctance to do it, at least in such an obvious way. there were certain conventions that were observed. There was some sort of a certain amount of restraint, but that has seemed to all has been thrown to the winds. And I think it is in part. I don't think you can put it all to blame on the IDF and the terrible example that they've set, but they certainly have. They have normalized carnage in a way. As it's not like the U.S. didn't, for example, what was it? It was the attack on, I can't remember the city, was it Mosul or whatever? That was in Iraq and fighting the ISIS.
ISIS?
Yeah, ISIS. Yeah, there were, up until the Gaza genocide, that attack was actually on that city, and I'm forgetting the name of the city. Forgive me. Was actually the most costly in terms of civilian casualties in this century. Now the IDF has by far surpassed that. Looking at it in per capita terms by a factor of 5 at least. But that was the worst. So, but the thing is, we didn't celebrate civilian casualties. It was and we generally tried to downplay them and hide them and talk about the necessity of going after ISIS. And I guess you can say the IDF did the same thing. But so it's not like, we didn't have any kind of blood on our hands. But it's just like the IDF in Gaza has taken things to such a new level. Like there's just no sense of shame. There's just no sense of there's no longer the need to feel, now we openly boast about it, these kind of things.
Right.
We saw that with that strike on the Houthi weddings. We saw that with the boats that are being blown out of the water, and they're still being blown out of the water, by the way, in the Caribbean.
Yeah, I'm afraid because it's almost like a drug user, and they want the other people around them to partake in the drugs they're into because it makes them feel better, more comfortable. It's like if Israel's able to get the United States to stoop to their level, then it just they'll be like, this is fantastic. So I feel like the goal is to get blood on our hands, and once there's enough blood on our hands, then we're just like, okay, well, we're here. I guess we got to move forward. This is. Like the situation that Israel's kind of in, to be honest. I mean, Israel's in this situation where Netanyahu are a big part of Israel, but I think the reason they're in such a bind is they've gone this far that I think they can't stop, because then they'd have to explain to the world why they committed half a genocide and what are they really all about and what's going on. It's like they've started it and now they can't stop it. And I think their goal is to try to get the United States in that position as well. And we'll just ease them in bit by bit, kill a couple people, break a couple laws, do assassinations, and then all of a sudden, hey, you're with us, let's go, That's kind of what I'm afraid is happening.
Yeah. I think that's part of it, that's part of the dynamic.
Ah, God, it's so gross. Okay, maybe we can end it there. We'll just every day go to bed, wake up, and just see if it started yet, It's nuts, Dad. It's really nuts.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, anything else you want to add?
No, I think that we covered enough ground. There are a lot of other things that we can talk about. We'll get to them next time, maybe. We'll see. We can't really cover everything. A lot of things that deserve to be discussed. Yeah,
I just feel
so
like
much is happening.
Right, and there's this whole standoff with Iran. This is the big thing. This is this is going to blow, and it's going to. And we're not ready for it. No, I don't think anybody is. It's going to get bad fast. I don't think people understand. Okay, well, on that happy note, we'll call it a day. All right. Okay. Have a good rest of your day, Dad. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.